Welcome everyone. My name is Sylvain Lézé from the Department of Aeronautics at Imperial College London in the UK, and this is the new episode of the podcast Turbulence at the Exascale. If you're not familiar with the podcast, we are trying to gather the view of the scientific community regarding the challenges and opportunities associated with exascale computing to study turbulent flows. So this podcast is part of the ExCALIBUR initiative, which was launched in the UK recently. It is led by the Met Office, the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and the UK Research and Innovation. And its aim is to develop new software to harness the power of exascale computing. This podcast is also linked, of course, to the UK Turbulence Consortium. Today, I'm very pleased to have a guest from France, although he is Italian. It's Mario Di Renzo, who is currently a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellow at CERFACS. And if you don't know CERFACS, Mario I will ask him a question to describe CERFACS. Mario has been working in Stanford, in the US, in Italy as well, and he has a lot of experience in high performance computing, in software development, especially to study high speed flows. So it's going to be great to talk to him today. So good afternoon, Mario.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me in this podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for those who don't know you, please can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you are from, what you have studied, and how did you end up at CERFACS in France?
Yeah, so I grew up in the southeast of Italy, in a place called Bari, where I did most of my studies. So I studied mechanical engineering, both the bachelor and the master's degree at the Politecnico di Bari. Except for 1 year where I got into a program that the Politecnico has with the Cranfield University in the UK. So I spent 1 year at Cranfield doing a Master of Science over there. After that Master of Science, I came back to Bari to start a PhD, where I studied the interaction between diffusion flames, and external electric fields. During the PhD in Bari, we have the requirement to spend at least 6 months in a foreign country. And I was lucky enough to get in touch with Dr. Urzai from the Center for Turbulence Research at Stanford University. And we arranged a visiting period over there, which lasts 6 months, where I studied and during this period, I continued my studies on the interaction between electric fields and flames, and also started some, let's say, side project about the still electric fields, but the interaction with particle-laden flows. After this first period at Stanford, I came back to Italy to complete my PhD in Bari. And after the PhD, I also stayed in Bari for some time to finish some of the activities related to the PhD. Then I went back to Stanford to do a 1 year of postdoc, still at the Center for Turbulence Research. Over there, I was in the group of Professor Moyne, and also worked a lot with Javier Urzai, and also a little bit with Professor Iaccarino. After this stay in Stanford, I came back to Italy, and particularly in Rome, at the Sapienza University, to work with Professor Pirozzoli. Over there, I studied compressible flows and did some work about the three-dimensional shock boundary layer interactions. And curiously, after a few days that I started my postdoc at the Sapienza, I received from the European Union the Marie Curie Fellowship that since last October funds me at CERFACS and I went back to studying turbulent flames impinged by external electric field.
Thank you very much. May I ask you, how did you become interested in high performance computing and in fluid flow and in combustion?
Okay, so the interest in fluid flows goes back to well before when I started my studies in engineering, because I like to go sailing, and basically in sailing most of the sailboat works because of fluid dynamics, I would say. So my interest goes back to those times. Then in Bari and also in Cranfield, I had the opportunity to start working in computational fluid dynamics, particularly applied to aeronautical applications, most of them. And these things evolve in like based on the opportunities you have to do research as you get to the PhD. And I liked multi-physics flow and complex flow configurations. And so I got involved into a project related to combustion and electric fields. Then from reacting flows, it was at Stanford there was interest about the hypersonics flow, and particularly at high enthalpies. So we moved from reacting for combustion to hypersonics, so reacting because of the high temperatures generated in the hypersonic flows. Well, now at CERFACS I'm working on again on combustion, so more or less that's the interesting in terms of the fluid physics. Regarding the HPC, I do computational fluid dynamics, and I think that if you want to do innovative things in fluid dynamics, the tools that you need to use are the HPC, and so you must like them, otherwise it's difficult to go ahead with the research, I guess.
Great, thank you. So before we start recording, you told me that you didn't really have the chance to spend too much time at CERFACS because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm going to change a little bit my question. So you have been working in Italy, you have been working in the US, and I guess a little bit in France. And what do you think, how they are different, those like doing research in Italy, in the US, and in France? I guess you don't have a lot of experience in France, but can you comment a little bit on this?
Well, I'll say that the focus on the main difference I see between the research in the US and the research in Italy is the kind of focus and how the research is driven. So I'd say that in the US, there is a lot of competition for fundings, and funding agency really influence the way research is conducted and what are the topics that are that need to be investigated. On the other hand, in Italy, there are less fundings in general for research, but that helps professors in searching their own field and their own interest in their research. So that's the main difference. Regarding France, my idea is very limited because I've been working at CERFACS in person for only 1 month, so my experience about that is limited. But that's yet another kind of research that, because CERFACS is a private company, and they have, I'd say, a very interesting mix of fundamental research and more applied research because of their collaboration with industries that makes their research even different from these other two type of for the Italian and US approach.
Great, thank you. So moving on, so can you tell us a little bit more about CERFACS, and in particular, what are your current research projects? I'm asking because people might not know CERFACS, so if you can give us a very brief introduction and then talk to us about your current research project.
Sure. So as I said, CERFACS is a company and has mainly two objectives. The first is research, both at a fundamental and more applied level, and the second is training. So training of so transferring the knowledge gained by research to people working in companies. They have strong collaboration with Safran, Airbus, Onera, Total, a lot of mainly French companies, but so based both on energy production and the energy production business and the aviation business. I've been mainly interacting with the CFD team at CERFACS, even though there are other 4 teams are in that. one regarding parallel algorithm and scientific computing, climate modeling, and I think another one about aviation environment. And I mean, there are many different topics going on over there. I'm not even entirely familiar with all of them. So, for instance, one that could be of interest for instance, for this podcast is the fact that CERFACS is part of the Center for of Excellence in Combustion, which basically they are trying to, I think, use exascale to produce very scalable applications that very scalable tools that can be used for to study combustion. And I think if you are interested in that, maybe one good contact for this project could be Benedicto. No? There is also an ERC project called Scirocco. They are trying to study H2 combustion, also in like many innovative things about combustion. Well, big name about so this ERC is managed by Thierry Poinceau, but also if maybe another very talented person that you may want to get in contact if you're interested in this is Davide Laira, who's also a senior researcher at CERFACS. I'll stop here about CERFACS because, as you said, I haven't been there for very long, so I cannot get into too much detail about what are their current activities. Going more into what are my research projects. Right now, I'm full-time funded by this Marie Curie Fellowship, and the topic of this Marie Curie Fellowship is studying the interaction of turbulent flames with external electric fields. So the idea is that the turbulent flames produce very high temperatures. In general, flames produce very high temperature in their reacting layer. Because of these very high temperatures, certain molecules start to dissociate, creating free electrons and ions. The idea is to impose an electric field which basically can steer these ions away from the flame, let them to collide with the neutral molecules that compose the gas outside the flame, and it will basically create a volumetric force around the flame that can actively control the combustion. So basically, by adding two electrodes or two or more electrodes, depending on the configuration, you can actively control the combustion process and maybe stabilize one flame or modify its shape, for instance. The objective of my fellowship is to numerically study the interaction of turbulent flames with the electric field. Then there are a number of side projects where my involvement is, it's subordinate to this main project. One is still in Bari, where we are using the HDR solver to study reacting shock boundary layer interactions. I'm still working with Professor Pirozzoli in Rome, and actually his project is funded by the Office for Scientific Research of the US Air Force, and there is a close collaboration with Professor Larson from Maryland University, and we are studying three-dimensional shock boundary layer interactions, and in general, single-phase hypersonic turbulence. And also, I'm part, even though it's a minor role in the PSAP-3 project at Stanford University, where they're trying to use the HDR solver to compute the probability ignition map of a rocket engine in doing a comparison between calculations and experiments about these laser ignited rocket burner.
Great, thank you. So I will come back to the HDR solver that you are using for some of your research projects, but I'm curious, what type of numerics, what type of solver are you using for your work at CERFACS on particles and electric charges?
It's still the HDR solver.
HDR solver.
Yeah. So this is a solver that I've developed during my postdoc at Stanford. So I started the development during the postdoc at Stanford. And then I continued it together with Professor Pirozzoli and now at CERFACS. It's a compressible reacting flow solver that was designed to do direct numerical simulation of hypersonic boundary layers at high enthalpies. So when chemical effects such as vibrational dissociation or vibrational excitation or chemical dissociation are relevant. Since we wanted to do direct numerical simulations, the solver implements low dissipation schemes. In particular, for the inviscid fluxes, it uses a TNOA scheme, but then it's been upgraded with an hybrid scheme which combines a skew-symmetric formulation in smooth region of the flow and a TNO formulation close to shocks, and that's very related to the research that Professor Pirozzoli has done in over the years. It is an explicit third order RK scheme for as an RK scheme for the time advancement. And the interesting thing is that it's task-based and it's based on a runtime called the Legion. So what task-based means is that it's a parallelization strategy which is quite different from the MPI. In practice, you organize your application as a number of tasks, which are basically sequential pieces of code which take some data in a data collection and modifies them. And basically, the solver is organized as a graph of these tasks. The main advantage you have in organizing the solver in this way is that you let the runtime do all the memory management operations such as communications, whereas the only thing you do is, other than defining the functionality of these tasks, is to assign these tasks to various pieces of the machine, which is particularly suitable for heterogeneous machines because you can assign one task to GPU, one task to CPUs, and the runtime can, by itself, schedules all the communications that are required to ensure that the algorithm is correctly executed on the machine.
Great, thank you. And a more specific question about, so the work you're doing at CERFACS is involving electric fields and particles. And I was wondering if with this task-based approach, you have any issues with that, or everything is working straightforwardly?
So the work I'm doing at CERFACS doesn't really involve particles. It's everything continuous. So okay. It's everything Eulerian as a formulation. But and currently I haven't encountered any specific drawback about the task-based implementation. And to follow up on the particle side, there have been some applications that have used task-based software architecture for Lagrangian particles, and they work correctly. I mean, they require some attention, but it's something that's completely doable.
Great. And can you give us an idea of the scale of the simulations that you are doing or you are planning to do in terms of number of cells, number of cores, or CPUs or GPUs, just to have an idea?
So the largest simulation I've run so far, so for production, it's 4 billion grid points. And this one was run on 64 nodes of Marconi 100 in Italy, which each node has 4 GPUs. We're speaking about 256 GPUs. But however, the code has been scaled up to 100 to twice as much the size in terms of nodes, and the efficiency is still around 94 to 95% in terms of weak scaling. Probably the most complex is a boundary layer, is the hypersonic boundary layer, where the size of the domain is slightly smaller because it's 2 billion grid points. But we have all the species due to the chemical dissociation of the the mixer and variable CPs that take into account the vibrational excitation of the molecules. And yeah, that probably that one is a good, it's a few billion degrees of freedom.
Excellent, very impressive. Thank you very much. And one final question about, and this will transition nicely with my questions regarding exascale computing. So your HTR solver seems to be working very nicely now with the hardware that are available to you. So for example, the GPU system on Marconi. Would you say that the solver is ready or is going to be ready soon for the next generation of supercomputers, so for exascale computers, or do you think you will have to rethink a little bit this task-based strategy?
Well, that's a very good question, because actually the main question is what these machines will look like, which is not 100% determined right now. In terms of organization, I would say that the task-based approach should be in general compatible with these kind of heterogeneous machines. So right now I don't see any real reason why that shouldn't work on next generation machines. One nice thing about the HTR solver in general of Legion is that they have also developed a programming language called Regent, yes, which automatically generates from a single source multiple binaries that can be executed on very different type of processors. So for instance, CPUs and GPUs right now. So the compatibility with new architectures, it's also related to how fast will be Regent, how fast Regent will be to, so actually how fast the Legion team will be to implement these new architectures in Regent. But potentially it could be a very easy transition.
Excellent. Well, good news for you.
Yeah, well, and, but you know, these kind of things is always are always very difficult to predict.
Of course. And final question about this solver. It's written in C++ or what's the programming language?
So the programming language is Regent.
Is Regent.
Programming language.
Okay.
Certain parts of the solver are right now implemented in C++ and CUDA, which can very easily interoperate with Regent. And that's due to certain optimization that at a certain point we decided to do.
Okay.
But the bulk of the code is implemented in Regent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And for those who are interested, there is of course a GitHub directory where you can find the code if you're interested. I think it's hosted by Stanford, right?
Yeah, it's a GitHub repository in the Stanford HPC Center.
Yeah, very good. Right, thank you very much. I have a few questions about exascale computer and exascale computing. So my first question is, I really like asking this question. So if I give you access tomorrow to an exascale computer, what will you be looking at that you currently cannot do because of computational restriction?
Well, this is a good question because well, the short answer is that larger, more complex problem. But I guess that's an easy it's the easiest answer.
Well, you know,
so for instance, the first thing that comes up to my mind is so in the problem that I'm currently solving, these turbulent flame with the impinging electric field. This is a very complex problem because you have very broad spectrum of timescales, because you have to transport electrons, so your time stepping is very limited by this advection of electrons, and also you have a huge number of degrees of freedom per each cell, because you need to transport a lot of species. Mm-hmm. And definitely having more computational power would help in going to more relevant, industrially relevant applications to study this interaction. Also in hypersonic turbulence, one of the problems, so as I told you, we reached around 4 billion grid points and a relatively high Reynolds number for our boundary layers. And still we always have the doubt that what we are seeing is due to Reynolds number dependency or influence from the inflow, particularly for cold wall boundary layers in hypersonics. So for instance, having access to a larger machine, like one of the things I would do is to run a larger boundary layer to make sure that what we are seeing is for instance, just part of is exactly there. It's not just a Reynolds number effect.
Right. And I forgot to ask you, I mean, I think you briefly mentioned you are doing DNS, right?
Yes.
Right. And so once again, curious question. So for your work with flame and electric field, is LES an option, or there is no suitable model for the complexity of the flows that you're looking at?
So there are ideas about models, but the real thing is that there is no real data about how so that correlates the subgrid scale motion of these charged particles within the flame. Yeah. So the idea is to run DNS in a simplified configuration and study these effects in view of generating or producing an LES model. That's the main idea.
Yeah, and for your high-speed boundary layers, yeah, is it possible to use larger dissimulation, or?
So the HDR doesn't currently feature a large eddy simulation model, but there are current efforts, for instance, at Stanford, to include large eddy simulation models in HDR, and so potentially in future releases, it will be possible to use large eddy simulations model.
Great, thank you. I have 3 more questions. My next question is, considering your experience in Italy, in the US, and a little bit in France, would you say that the CFD community is ready for the next generation of exascale computers? Or do you think, based once again on what you can see with your colleagues, and that's where there is still a lot of work to be done? Well, it looks like with the HTR solver, you are doing well, but what do you think of others and other solvers?
So I think that especially in the recent years, there have been a lot of efforts in developing solvers that are compatible with heterogeneous architecture. For instance, like the first solvers that comes up to my mind is Streams, developed by Professor Pilozzoli and Professor Bernardini in Rome. There is OpenSBLI that has been developed in the UK. I mean, there are definitely a lot of efforts in that direction. I guess that the real answer to this question can be like, it really depends on what these machines will look like again, because if no big revolutions in the infrastructure of the machine and requirements of the machine will be made, I think that all these codes will be able to scale on new machines, clearly with certain limits. If on the other hand, some kind of revolution happens, or sometimes some kind of different requirements are set by new hardware, then it's going to be challenging. But that's also the interesting part of this entire effort, I guess.
Great. And talking about hardware, if you had if you had the possibility to choose or to design your own hardware to fit your needs, so I'm talking about you will want more memories, more an increased frequency for the CPUs. I don't know, anything. What would you change in the current hardware that is available to you?
So I'll say that that right now CPUs offer a lot of throughput, but their affinity to memory and the available memory that they have is sometimes the limiting factor in the calculations that we can do. So adding a little bit more memory to GPUs and increasing their affinity between the cores, or between the cores and the memory, would definitely help. Another thing still about memory, another thing that it's maybe it's a requirement that like it's a desire that comes from the use of Legion. It's having better affinity between all the different chips that you have on the machine with the memory that is available. Because for instance, with Legion, you can decide to bring dynamically decide to bring one task to CPUs while leaving the rest of the solver on GPUs. Mm-hmm. Right now, that requires internal communications between the CPU memory and the GPU memory.
Yeah, and
that definitely brings the trade-off in doing this kind of operation toward keeping everything, all the computation intensive part of the calculation on GPUs. Whereas if there was a better affinity between the CPU and the GPU visible memory,
yeah,
it could be interesting to see if we can take better advantage of CPUs, for instance.
Great, thank you very much. And I have one last question. Once again, a very highly hypothetical questions. So we are talking a lot of the exascale era, but my question is about what will come next, to your opinion. So do you think we are going to have like an evolution of the current hardware where the GPUs are going to be more powerful with more memory, more energy efficient, or do you think we are going to have a revolution in terms of hardware? So I'm thinking in particular about quantum computing. And do you think that like in 20 years, you will have to completely redesign your solver? What's your view about on the long term in terms of HPC?
Well, that's a very difficult question, because the industry that produces components for HPC evolves very, very fast, and it's very difficult to say what is going to happen. In the near future, I hope the performance of these components will improve, but without a big revolution in the computational strategy, because otherwise it becomes difficult to keep up with all these changes. In long term, definitely quantum computing sounds very interesting, though I don't know enough about it to say if it's really relevant for computational fluid dynamics or not. So it's long term, it's very unclear to me what's going to happen.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mario, for your time and for your inputs. It was very nice talking to you about your research and about your amazing HCR solver. We wish you all the best for your current project. Hopefully you will be able to go back to CERFACS in person very soon, which I'm pretty sure is going to happen over the summer by how things are looking at. So thank you, Mario.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And yeah, thank you. Thanks.
My pleasure. And as usual, the recording of the podcast are available on the UK Turbulence Consortium website. So just Google UK Turbulence in one word, and everything will also be posted on Twitter. Once again, UK Turbulence is the Twitter account. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and hope to see you soon in a new episode. Thank you.